Guys, I just can't get enough of this photo. I mean, there was this blank space right here in the beginning of this lecture, and I thought, I want to use it. I want to use it to celebrate the cat island. What's this guy looking at? You know, what's going on there? Anyway, let's take a little bit of photosynthesis. So we know that photosynthesis is the process by which plants and other organisms, autotrophs, auto meaning kind of like they can work on, if you think about autopilot, the plane pilots itself, well, autotrophs make their own food. They don't need to get it from anything else, they can make it themselves. So they use it to convert light energy into chemical energy, and this chemical energy we know is glucose. And it's basically what happens before cellular respiration. So you have carbon dioxide and water and light energy, and you make glucose and oxygen, okay? If you want to look at the chemical structure of that, it's this. You've got your glucose, your oxygen, your water, your carbon dioxide, and your light energy. So what's the difference between cellular respiration and photosynthesis? Again, cellular respiration starts with glucose, but this glucose is the end product of photosynthesis. So the plants make the glucose, okay, and then it travels to the mitochondria in a number of ways, by eating plants for one. And then that's where you have your glucose in the presence of oxygen, primarily as you're getting your 36 ATPs. We know if we don't have oxygen, we get about 2. So you've got, that's kind of where we're going for. So we're going to look at how this glucose is made, how you take essentially carbon dioxide and water and sunlight and you use it to make glucose, which is the foundation of energy, which would not be, and that energy, is the foundation of life. Plants. Okay, so plants are the main photosynthesizers. We can talk about different bacteria or some of the protists, some of the lower single-celled organisms, yes, but plants are the main photosynthesizers. They're the ones that give us the most energy. They produce the most glucose, the most. So that happens in the chloroplasts. Okay, chloroplasts are in many ways similar. They mirror the mitochondria. So as you have in animal cells and plant cells, but you have the mitochondria. So that's pretty much, the chloroplasts are pretty much like best friends, like besties. It's kind of like, again, Jay-Z and Beyonce, right? Who is the mitochondria? Who's the chloroplast? That's not for me to say. But there are two things in there that produce a lot of energy and a lot of hits. Anyway, so then you have just to kind of the main structure of the chloroplast is you have your outer membranes, which are here, right? Your outer membranes. And then you have another membrane that's on the outside of that. So you've got these two membranes. You've got your thylakoids, which are, they're the ones that kind of grab the light. They're the ones that are pigmented, their color. And the stroma. The stroma is kind of the center of the chloroplast. Think of it like the matrix, okay, in the mitochondria. Hey, why are plants green? Great question. I'm glad you asked that. So what is happening, the reason why plants are green, it has to do with these pigments. So you have light energy, it's a spectrum. We can only see really that a small sliver, that visible light, which is that a tiny sliver of, on the whole spectrum of light, we can see a little tiny sliver, okay? So when we see something, when we identify something as having a color, what is happening is that light is being bounced, okay? So if something is green, it's because all the other pigments are being absorbed and green is being reflected, okay? I don't know what's going on with these people, or these people, but it looks like they're mesmerized by the wonderment of something above them. Okay, maybe they're in an air and water show. Who am I to judge? So point is, when things are reflected, when things exhibit a color, it's because they're reflecting those wavelengths. And these wavelengths are actually energy wavelengths. So, and we'll talk about that in a second. So these chloroplasts contain pigments. They contain colors, okay? And they're used to either absorb or reflect. They're absorbing these ones, and these are the different colors, right? So they're absorbing they absorb these, and these help with the process. They're like with chlorophyll, they do absorb some of that green light, but a lot of it is bounced. A lot of it is reflected. They're like, thank you very much. We'll catch you later, okay? We'll smell you later. So it contains this chlorophyll and other pigments that are capable of absorbing solar energy. And that energy is what starts photosynthesis that leads to the production of glucose, which can lead to the production of ATP in this circle of life, circle of energy. Okay, how does this all work? Let me explain. So chloroplasts are green because you have these chlorophyll pigments, okay? And they absorb red and blue, and they bounce green out. Okay, so it's a green pigment because it's green because that's what it's reflecting, that is responsible for the absorption of light. So if you look here, this has to do with the energy of light. So just really briefly, just so we know why things have different colors, is that they have a different amount of energy. So red light has 650 nanometers, whereas your blues are going to be about 400. Okay, so the deeper the color, the more energy. Well, I should say. So that's where we go. So we want this, and we want this red business. The green, we're good. We don't really need that in terms of the light energy that we can use to make glucose. So that's where that's coming from. This is your chlorophyll, okay? So I don't know why this is all weird. So light comes in, and all of this is absorbed. This is not. It's bounced back, and that's why it looks green. So these things were the thycaloids right here. They take them and they're like, yeah, we're gonna use these. It's gonna be great. We're gonna make so much glucose. So that's what happens there. So they're absorbing that light, but there is some light that's transmitted out, and there's some reflected light. And if you look at these charts, here we go, right? Like I said, these are the ones that we need. The red and the blue light is what we need. So if you look here, in terms of absorb, these are all absorbed. Yellow, green, no thank you. And then we want these to absorb. This just kind of reiterates the fact that we're absorbing the red and the blue lights, okay? And again, we come back here, this has to do with CO2 production. We know that plants use CO2, right? So they're using more CO2 for the red and the blue lights than they would be for the green and the yellow. That makes sense. They're using that carbon dioxide to produce energy and also release oxygen as a byproduct. Okay, so the structure of chloroplasts, like I said, you've got this double membrane right there, the inner and the outer membrane, inner membrane, outer membrane. They have this stroma, which is the stuff in the middle of the chloroplast. These are the pigments. These are where the pigments are. These are where the thycaloids are. These are just stacked up. These are kind of how these guys are arranged in stacks on stacks. And it's very similar to the mitochondria because they're both in the energy producing game. They're both in the energy. That's what they're in the business, the energy business. Here we go with photosynthesis. So hopefully that pigment stuff makes sense. So what am I looking for? That that plants reflect green. They want the red and the blue, light, essentially. So you have your solar energy. You've got two parts. The first part of photosynthesis is your light reactions. This is also the Kelvin cycle. You might have heard it as the dark reaction. It doesn't really happen in dark. It just doesn't need light. This one needs light. It needs light to drive this. But once this gets started, you can see it passes ATP, NADPH. It passes these along. Doesn't need light for this to happen, for the Kelvin cycle to happen, but the light reactions are dependent on light. The Kelvin cycle, you can also think of as our good friend, the Krebs cycle. That's kind of the cellular respiration equivalent. So yeah, CY, sorry guys. There you go. So that's basically it. So the stroma is kind of like the stuff in between. That's the two main parts. Okay, I'm going to break these down a little bit, and I'm going to let you know what I know. All right, good times. Light reactions, you're taking your solar energy and you're making chemical energy. You're producing a little bit of ATP, just enough to get this party going, the Calvin cycle. So it uses this ATP, it takes carbon dioxide and it makes sugar. Yay, sugar. There we go. That's like the big picture. Now, a couple things to look at is the light dependent. This is essentially, you can think of it as like the first step. Okay. The chlorophyll absorbs light energy. This gets the electrons pumped, right? We know that, like we saw in the ETC, the electrons basically, that's a horrifying smiley face. We saw that the electrons bounce along that electron transport chain, and they create a situation, they create a gradient in which energy can be produced. Same thing, right? Chlorophyll, that light hits the chlorophyll, and the electrons are like ready to party. So the electrons move through the photosystems, similar to this situation, okay? When water, so the electrons come from water, and they produce oxygen and hydrogen, okay? This is what forms that difference. Now, in cellular respiration, we used, we had FADs, right? And NADs. Okay, here we got this. So think of this, instead of, these are no longer your bouncers, right? This is your photosynthesis bouncer. Think of this as like, and the P there, think P for photosynthesis. What? That's crazy. So yeah, so these are gonna be your like electron carriers. Very similar to cellular respiration. All right, second step. This is kind of what the photosystems look like. I'm not gonna worry too much about this. Just know this is kind of like the second half of the light reactions. Cool. So there we go. That's the electrons going through the photosystems. Energy is made. Life is love is restored in the kingdom. Okay. So this happens in the center. Okay. Think of it like your Krebs cycle. Does not necessarily require light. Okay. But it does. It needs light in terms of that's where the ATP comes in. Okay. So we're not going to talk about this in a lot. We're not going to get too in depth. Know that it takes carbon dioxide, takes that carbon and that oxygen, makes glucose. This comes back to this. You get your ADP. And these go back to the light reactions. They help to fuel the light reactions. Like a cycle. So you've got your carbon dioxide, right? Because we know that plants need that carbon dioxide to undergo photosynthesis. You have a series of chemical reactions. You have sugar being produced, okay? And you had these ATPs being produced as well as these to help go back and help fuel the light reaction. It's so easy, right? It's so fun. All right, here's your overview. Hopefully this makes sense. You've got your light reactions, boom, 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 boom. You definitely need water. Definitely releases oxygen. This is where we get all the oxygen that we breathe. Yay! And you've got your carbon dioxide here, necessary component. And you got the formation of sugar. Is this simplified? Heck yes. But please take notes. Please ask if you have any questions on the end of those notes, and we can go over them tomorrow. God, does the fun ever start? Don't answer that.